A family's dream vacation. A sun-drenched pool at an exclusive resort. Laughter echoing in the warm summer air. It was a perfect picture. But in a single moment, that picture was torn to shreds. When two police officers, fueled by a poisonous complaint, descended on this black family. They saw criminals where there were guests. They saw trespassers where there was a loving father, a devoted mother, and their innocent children. They handcuffed a man in front of his family, convinced they were upholding the law. But what these cops didn't know was that the man they were arresting wasn't just a father on vacation. He was one of them. And the storm of karma they were about to unleash would not only end their careers, but would shatter the foundations of their entire department. The sun over Eagles Peak, North Carolina, was generous. It cast a brilliant honey gold light across the pristine waters of the Lakeside Grand Resort's sprawling swimming pool. For Special Agent Marcus Sutton of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, this light was a world away from the harsh fluorescent glare of interrogation rooms and the sterile gray of federal buildings in Washington, D.C. For one blissful week, he wasn't Agent Sutton, the man who dismantled domestic terror cells. He was just Marcus, husband to the brilliant and beautiful Dr. Anya Sutton, and father to 14-year-old Maya and 8-year-old Leo. Ania, a pediatrician whose gentle hands had soothed 1,000 fevers, lay on a plush lounge chair, a medical journal resting unread on her lap. Her eyes, full of a deep, contented warmth, were fixed on her family. Maya, with the lanky grace of a teenager, was trying to teach a giggling Leo how to do a handstand in the shallow end. Their laughter was a melody, a perfect soundtrack to this stolen slice of paradise. "See, I told you this was worth it," Marcus said, settling into the chair beside his wife. He handed her a tall glass beaded with condensation. "No phones, no case files, just us." Anna took a sip of her iced tea and smiled. "It's perfect, Marcus. Truly. Leo hasn't stopped smiling since we got here, and Maya, I think she's actually forgotten about her TikTok for a whole hour." They watched as Leo, in a final flailing attempt, sent a huge splash of water cascading over Maya's head. Her shriek of mock outrage was followed by a playful tackle, the two of them disappearing into a churning foam of sibling rivalry. This was the reward, the reason for the long hours, the missed dinners, the constant low-level hum of danger that was the backdrop to Marcus's life. It was for them to give them a life of peace, safety, and opportunity, to see them splash in a luxury pool without a care in the world. From across the pool, hidden behind a pair of oversized designer sunglasses, Brenda Langford watched the Sutton family with a tightening knot of resentment in her stomach. She sat with her husband, Tom, a man whose silence she had long ago mistaken for agreement. In her mind, the resort was her sanctuary, a carefully curated world of people who looked, acted, and sounded just like her. The Sutton, with their easy laughter and confident presence, were an anomaly. They didn't fit her picture. She watched Marcus, a tall, powerfully built black man, laughing with his wife. She saw Anya's effortless elegance, her designer swimsuit, the expensive-looking watch on her wrist. She saw their children splashing in the nice part of the pool. It wasn't one single thing she could point to. It was a collection of tiny prejudiced assumptions that were now coalescing into a single ugly conviction. "They don't belong here," she muttered just loud enough for Tom to hear. Tom sighed, not looking up from his novel. "Brenda, please, they're guests just like us." "How do you know?" she snapped. "This is an exclusive resort. They probably snuck in. You see it all the time on the news. They use the facilities, cause trouble. It lowers the tone of the place. They're not causing any trouble. Their kids are just playing." But Brenda wasn't listening. Her gaze was fixed on the family. She saw Marcus get up and walk over to the poolside bar, ordering a round of lemonades for his kids. The way he carried himself with an unshakable confidence she found infuriatingly arrogant was the final straw. It was an authority he had no right to in her world. She pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over the keypad. "What are you doing?" Tom asked, a note of dread in his voice. "I'm doing what's right," Brenda said, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "I'm calling security, or better yet, the police. There are suspicious individuals trespassing on private property, making the paying guests feel unsafe." Tom closed his book, the spell of his own vacation now broken. "Brenda, for God's sake, don't do this. You have no idea who they are. You're going to ruin their day and ours for no reason." Her eyes narrowed into venomous slits. "They are ruining my vacation by just being here." She turned away from him, her back a rigid wall of certainty. She dialed 911. Her voice, when she spoke, was a masterful performance of feigned fear and concern. She described a loud, aggressive man and his unruly family who were acting suspiciously and refusing to leave the pool area. She painted them as a threat, a blight on the pristine canvas of the lakeside Grand Resort. She omitted their race, but she didn't have to. In a town like Eagles Peak, her coded language was as clear as a siren in the night. In the dispatch center, the call was logged. A cruiser was assigned, and 2 officers, Sergeant Bill Callahan and his junior partner, Officer Rick Miller, began rolling towards a paradise they were about to turn into a living hell. Sergeant Bill Callahan drove with a grim satisfaction. At 52, he was a man carved from the cynical granite of old-school policing. He saw the world in shades of black and white, but his definition of those shades was often determined by the color of a person's skin. He was a product of his upbringing, a legacy of ingrained prejudice he wore as comfortably as his badge. The call about suspicious individuals at the Lakeside Grand was exactly the kind of thing that affirmed his worldview. To him, suspicious at a place like that was a dog whistle, and he heard it loud and clear. Next to him, Officer Rick Miller, barely 5 years on the force, fidgeted with the brim of his hat. Miller was a follower, a man who navigated his career by latching onto the certainty of stronger personalities. Callahan was the strongest personality in the precinct, and Miller had learned that agreement was the easiest path to a quiet shift. Yet sometimes a flicker of his own conscience would try to ignite a small, timid flame in the gale force of Callahan's certitude. They pulled into the resort's opulent driveway, the cruiser's tires crunching on the pristine gravel. They didn't bother checking in at the front desk. Callahan believed in direct action. They walked through the lobby, their heavy boots a stark, clumping intrusion on the resort's serene ambiance. The scene at the pool was exactly as tranquil as Brenda Langford's call had suggested it wasn't. Families lounged, children splashed, and in the center of it all were the Sutton. Marcus was now in the water with his kids, lifting Leo into the air like an airplane. Callahan's eyes scanned the area and landed on Brenda, who gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod in the Suttons' direction. That was all the confirmation he needed. He squared his shoulders, his entire posture broadcasting an authority he was about to abuse. "All right, Miller, let's go have a word," he grunted. They approached the edge of the pool, their shadows falling over the Sutton family. "Excuse me," Callahan's voice boomed, sharp and accusatory. It cut through the happy sounds of the pool like a shard of glass. Marcus stopped playing with Leo and turned. He shielded his eyes from the sun, a slight frown touching his lips. He saw the 2 uniformed officers standing over him. He instinctively did what he was trained to do. He assessed 2 officers, one older, looks like the senior man, posture aggressive, hand resting near his sidearm. The other younger, nervous, avoiding eye contact. Threat level initially low, but potentially volatile. "Can I help you, officers?" Marcus asked, his voice even and calm. He kept his body language open and non-threatening, placing himself slightly in front of his children. "We've had a complaint," Callahan said, his gaze sweeping over Marcus, then Anya, with undisguised disdain. "A complaint about trespassing." Anya sat up, her sunglasses sliding down her nose. "Trespassing?" I'm sorry, officer. I think there's been a mistake. We're guests here. Room 312. Callahan ignored her completely, his focus locked on Marcus. This was a classic interrogation tactic. Isolate and intimidate the perceived leader. I need you to step out of the pool, sir. Marcus's internal alarm bells began to ring. This wasn't a simple inquiry. The tone, the posture, the immediate presumption of guilt, it was all wrong. But he knew the rules of this particular game. Comply, de-escalate, explain. Of course, officer, he said smoothly. He boosted Leo towards the pool steps. Go to your mom, Leo. He then turned to Maya. Sweetheart, you too. He hoisted himself out of the pool, water streaming from his powerful frame. He stood before the officers, unarmed, wearing nothing but swim trunks. Yet Callahan looked at him as if he were a coiled threat. What seems to be the problem? Marcus asked again, his voice still level. A model of professional calm. The problem is we have a report that you don't belong here, Callahan said, stepping closer, invading Marcus's personal space. I'm going to need to see your room key and some ID. I'd be happy to provide that, Marcus replied. My wallet and our room keys are in our bag right over there by my wife's chair. He gestured with his head. Callahan didn't move. You stay right here, Miller. Go check the bag. Miller, looking increasingly uncomfortable, walked over to Anya. Ma'am, I need to see your bag. Anya, now standing, her arms protectively around a confused Leo, looked from Miller's nervous face to Callahan's hostile one. My husband just told you our room number. Can't you verify it with the front desk? Why do you need to go through our personal belongings? Dr. Raya Sutton was not a woman who intimidated easily. She had faced down distraught parents and stared into the face of terminal illness. The sight of a cop on a power trip didn't scare her. It angered her. Ma'am, just cooperate and this will all go a lot faster, Callahan barked. His patience, a shallow reservoir to begin with, now completely gone. Miller, following orders, picked up the designer beach bag. He fumbled through it, past the sunscreen, the snacks for the kids, and finally pulled out Marcus's wallet and 2 plastic key cards. He brought them back to Callahan. Callahan snatched the wallet. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning the driver's license. Marcus Sutton, Washington, D.C., huh? Long way from home. He deliberately mispronounced Anaya's name as he looked at her ID. What are you people doing here? The phrase hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. You people! Marcus's jaw tightened. The professional calm he had so carefully maintained was beginning to fracture. He could feel the heat rising in his chest. It wasn't the fear of an ordinary citizen. It was the cold fury of a federal officer witnessing a flagrant abuse of power against his own family. We're on vacation, officer, Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its conciliatory edge and gaining a steely one. Just like everyone else here, my wife is a doctor. I work for the government. We paid for our room, and we are entitled to be here. Callahan sneered, flipping the wallet shut and tossing it onto the pavement. Lots of people work for the government. Doesn't mean you're not trespassing. These room keys could be stolen. Maya, who had been watching with wide, horrified eyes, finally spoke up. He's lying. We didn't steal anything. This is our hotel. Maya, be quiet, Anya said softly, pulling her daughter closer. Callahan turned his head slowly, his eyes locking on the 14-year-old girl. You need to learn to respect the police, young lady. Your father should teach you some manners. That was the line. The moment the FBI agent receded and the father surged forward. You will not speak to my daughter that way, Marcus said, his voice now a low growl. He took a half-step forward. You are out of line, Sergeant. He had clocked the stripes on Callahan's sleeve. Callahan's face lit up with a perverse glee. This was the reaction he had been hoping for, the aggression he could use as justification. Oh, I'm out of line. You're the one getting aggressive. You see, Miller, this is what I was talking about. You get confrontational, and now I'm starting to think there's more going on here. He unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click echoed in the suddenly silent poolside area. The laughter and splashing had stopped. Everyone was watching. "Sergeant, I advise you to think very carefully about your next move," Marcus said, his voice deadly serious. He was no longer trying to de-escalate. He was giving a professional warning, but Callahan was beyond listening. He was on a power trip, fueled by prejudice and emboldened by the badge on his chest. He saw a black man challenging his authority, and his mind was already made up. "I've thought about it," Callahan snarled. "You're under arrest for trespassing and disorderly conduct. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back now." The world seemed to slow down. For Marcus Sutton, time dilated, each second stretching into an eternity of impossible choices. His training screamed at him, "Do not resist. Resistance escalates. Escalation leads to violence. Your family is here." His instincts as a father and a man roared in defiance. "Protect them. Do not let this man humiliate you in front of your children. Do not let them win." The training won. It always did. It was a discipline drilled into him at Quantico, honed over a decade of facing down men far more dangerous than this glorified bully with a badge. He knew that in this scenario, the uniform was a suit of armor he couldn't penetrate, and the only way to survive was to submit for now. He slowly raised his hands, a gesture of universal surrender. "Sergeant, you are making a grave mistake. The only mistake was you thinking you could talk to me like that." Callahan spat back. He shoved Marcus, still dripping with pool water, towards a nearby wall. On the wall, "Spread them." Anya gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Marcus, no. Officer, please listen to me. This is insane." Leo, seeing his father being pushed, finally burst into tears. His small body shook with sobs, his innocent mind unable to process why the smiling policemen from cartoons were hurting his daddy. "Mommy, what's happening? Make them stop." Maya stood frozen, her face a pale mask of shock and rage. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she made no sound. She was old enough to understand exactly what was happening. This wasn't a mistake. This was a story she had read about, seen on the news, a reality her parents had tried to prepare her for, but that she had never truly believed could happen to them, not to her father, the strongest man she knew. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Marcus's wrists. Callahan cinched them brutally tight, grinding the steel against his bones. The sheer gratuitous cruelty of the act sent a jolt of white-hot fury through Marcus, but he channeled it, burying it deep inside, converting it into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. He would remember this, every single second of it. "You have the right to remain silent," Callahan began, reciting the Miranda warning in a bored, mocking tone as he hauled Marcus to his feet. The entire pool area was a gallery of silent, staring faces. Some guests looked away, ashamed or afraid to get involved. Others, like Brenda Langford, watched with a smug, vindicated smirk. She had been right all along. She had protected her sanctuary. The walk from the pool, through the lobby, and out to the squad car was the longest walk of Marcus Sutton's life. He was barefoot in swim trunks, water dripping onto the pristine marble floors, his hands cuffed behind his back. It was a calculated performance of humiliation, and Callahan was the proud director. Miller trailed behind, his eyes fixed on the floor. The picture of a man whose conscience was being systematically executed by his own cowardice. Anya, holding a sobbing Leo and a shell-shocked Maya, followed them. "Where are you taking him?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. "What precinct? I need your badge numbers." Callahan paused at the door of the cruiser and turned, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Don't you worry, ma'am. We'll take real good care of your husband." He shoved Marcus roughly into the back of the car, the top of his head hitting the doorframe. The door slammed shut, a final definitive sound. As the cruiser pulled away, Maya finally found her voice. She screamed, a raw, primal sound of a child watching her hero being taken away. "Daddy!" Inside the car, Marcus tuned out Callahan's gloating monologue. He was already working. He cataloged every detail. The time, the location, the exact words used. Miller's silence, the tightness of the cuffs, the unnecessary force. He committed the faces of the crowd to memory. He was no longer a victim. He was an investigator, and this was now his case. His mind was a clean, cold place, a fortress against the humiliation and rage that threatened to consume him. He knew that the moment would come when the power dynamic would shift. It wouldn't be a sudden, dramatic outburst. It would be a quiet, procedural, and utterly devastating reversal. He wouldn't just be exonerated. He would be the instrument of their reckoning. At the Eagles Peak Police Department, a small, dreary building that smelled of stale coffee and desperation, Marcus was paraded through the squad room. Callahan made sure of it, announcing to anyone who would listen. "Look what we dragged in from the fancy resort. Thinks he's better than everyone." They put him in a holding cell, a grimy concrete box with a single metal bench. The air was thick and foul. The door clanged shut, and he was alone. The rage he had suppressed for so long finally had room to breathe. He closed his eyes, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles turned white. The image of Leo's crying face, of Maya's terrified eyes, of Anya's defiant helplessness, it burned behind his eyelids. This wasn't just an unlawful arrest anymore. This was an unforgivable sin against his family. And Sergeant Bill Callahan had no idea the hell that was about to rain down upon him. He had just arrested a man who had taken down crime syndicates and outsmarted terrorists, and he had done it for the worst, most ignorant reason imaginable. Meanwhile, back at the resort, Anya had sprung into action. After calming her children as best she could, she made a single crucial phone call. Not to a lawyer, not yet. She called a number Marcus had made her memorize for emergencies. Just like this, a calm, professional voice answered on the second ring. "FBI Washington Field Office. This is Agent Romano." Anya took a deep, studying breath. "Michael, it's Anya Sutton. I have a situation. Marcus has been arrested." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then the voice sharpened, losing all its casualness. "Where are you, Anna? Give me everything you have." The weight of the federal government was about to pivot and focus on a small town in North Carolina. The storm was coming. The booking room at the Eagles Peak PD was a cramped, poorly lit space where dignity went to die. Marcus sat on a hard plastic chair, the over-tightened cuffs now sending numb, tingling signals up his arms. Callahan swaggered in, holding a clipboard, a self-satisfied smirk plastered on his face. Miller lingered by the door, a silent, anxious ghost. "All right, Sutton," Callahan began, purposefully mispronouncing his name as Sudan. "Let's get your information. Full name, Marcus. What is it?" Marcus remained silent. He stared at a point on the wall just past Callahan's ear. He was done playing their game. The de-escalation phase was over. Now it was about control. His silence was a weapon, and it immediately unnerved the sergeant. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Callahan snapped, his voice rising. "You want to add resisting an officer to your charges? It's your funeral." Marcus slowly turned his head and met Callahan's eyes. The look in them was not of a defeated man. It was cold, analytical, and utterly devoid of fear. It was the look of a predator patiently watching its prey walk into a trap. "The cuffs are too tight, Sergeant," Marcus stated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Per departmental policy in most jurisdictions, you're required to double lock them and ensure they don't restrict circulation. You have done neither. That's a liability issue." Callahan was taken aback by the procedural specificity. "Are you a lawyer?" he sneered. "No," Marcus said. Then shut up and answer my questions. Full name? My name is Marcus Sutton. S-U-T-O-N. He spelled it out slowly as if talking to a child. Date of birth is November 12, 1983. Address, 127, Gardenia Lane, Arlington, Virginia. Callahan scribbled it down. All right, occupation. He looked up, a cruel glint in his eye. Let me guess. Rapper, basketball player. Miller flinched by the door. The racism was so blatant, so unprofessional, it made his stomach turn, but he said nothing. His silence was his complicity. Marcus let the slurs hang in the air for a beat, letting their ugliness fill the small room. He then answered, his voice still unnervingly calm. I am a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The pen in Callahan's hand stopped moving. For a full 3 seconds, there was absolute silence, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Callahan stared, his brain trying to process the words to fit them into his prejudiced narrative. They didn't fit. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with a piece from a different box. Then he let out a short, barking laugh. A what? An FBI agent? That's the best you could come up with, buddy. I've heard it all. CIA, Secret Service, King of England, you're not even original. Check my wallet again, Sergeant. Marcus said, look behind my driver's license. You'll find my credentials. My federal ID number is 75B1-138. Callahan's smirk faltered. The level of detail, the ID number, was specific. It planted a tiny seed of doubt in his mind. He gestured at Miller with his head. Miller, get his wallet from the evidence bag. Miller, looking almost relieved to have a task, retrieved the wallet. He handed it to Callahan, who snatched it and opened it again. He pulled out the driver's license. Tucked behind it was another card, a card that was instantly, terrifyingly recognizable to any law enforcement officer in the country. It was dark blue with the iconic seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And under the seal, above a photograph of the man sitting handcuffed in front of him, were the words, Marcus Sutton, Special Agent, United States Department of Justice. Callahan's face went white. The blood drained from it so fast he looked like he might faint. The swagger evaporated, replaced by a creeping cold dread. He looked from the ID to Marcus's face, then back to the ID. He felt a wave of nausea. This couldn't be real. It's a fake, he whispered, though his voice lacked any conviction. It has to be a fake. Call the Washington field office, Marcus instructed, his voice taking on a new tone of command. The number is on the back of the card. Ask for Special Agent in Charge, Michael Romano. Tell him you have Agent Sutton in custody in Eagles Peak, North Carolina. Then start praying he's in a good mood. The name Michael Romano landed like a physical blow. Romano was a legend in the Bureau, a notoriously tough but fair leader who was fiercely protective of his agents. Having his name invoked was like hearing thunder when you're standing in an open field holding a metal rod. Callahan's hands were shaking now. He fumbled with the ID, almost dropping it. He looked at Miller, his eyes wide with panic. Miller just stared back, his expression a mask of dawning horror. They had done it. They had really, truly done it. They hadn't just arrested an innocent man. They had arrested a federal agent. They had crossed a line that didn't just end careers. It led to federal charges. Suddenly, the door to the booking room burst open. A portly man in a rumpled suit, with the frantic air of someone whose day had just exploded, rushed in. It was Chief David Peterson. "Callahan Miller, my office now," he bellowed, his face flushed and sweaty. He didn't even look at Marcus. He had clearly already gotten a phone call. Callahan stood frozen, the FBI credentials still in his trembling hand. "Did you not hear me?" "Move!" Peterson roared. As Callahan and Miller scrambled out of the room, Peterson finally turned to Marcus. The chief's eyes were filled with a terror Marcus had seen many times before. The look of a man staring into the abyss of his own catastrophic failure. "Agent Sutton," Peterson said, his voice barely a croak, "there has been a A truly terrible misunderstanding. Marcus looked down at his cuffed hands, then back up at the chief. He gave him a cold, empty smile. "Chief Peterson," he said, the words dripping with ice, "your misunderstanding is just getting started." The atmosphere in Chief David Peterson's office was thick with the stench of panic. Callahan and Miller stood before his desk like two errant schoolboys, stripped of all their earlier bravado. The chief, meanwhile, was on the phone, his face a blotchy patchwork of red and pale white. He was sweating profusely, dabbing at his forehead with a crumpled handkerchief. "Yes, sir. Mr. Romano, I understand completely." "No, sir. There is no excuse, absolutely none. He is being released immediately. Of course. Yes, I have their badges right here." Peterson's eyes darted venomously towards Callahan and Miller. He hung up the phone with a trembling hand and let it clatter into its cradle. He stared at his two officers for a long moment, his chest heaving. The silence was more damning than any shouting could have been. "You two," he finally rasped, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Do you have any idea what you have just done? Do you?" Callahan started to stammer. "Chief, we had a complaint." He was non-compliant. He got aggressive. Peterson slammed his fist on the desk, making both officers jump. "I have the FBI's special agent in charge on the phone, a man who sounds like he chews nails for breakfast, telling me that one of his top counterterrorism agents, a man with a chest full of commendations, was just arrested while playing with his 8-year-old son in a swimming pool. And you're telling me he was the aggressor? The complaint?" Miller began weakly. "Oh, the complaint!" Peterson laughed a bitter, humorless sound. "I've already pulled the 911 tape, a complaint from a known busybody, Brenda Langford, who has called us 6 times this year for nonsense, like a neighbor's dog barking too loud and teenagers skateboarding on the sidewalk. And you two geniuses decided to take her word as gospel and arrest a family on vacation without so much as a 5-minute conversation with the resort manager." The chief's gaze settled on Callahan, and the temperature in the room dropped. "This has your fingerprints all over it, Bill. I've looked the other way on your methods for too long. I've listened to you gripe in the break room, read your thinly veiled reports. I knew this day was coming." He opened his desk drawer and pulled out 2 forms. "You are both suspended, effective immediately. Hand over your badges and your service weapons. Internal Affairs is opening a full investigation, but that's just a formality. The FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility is sending a team down from D.C. They'll be here by morning. You are to have no contact with each other. You are not to access any police facilities. And you are to get yourselves lawyers, very, very good ones." Callahan's face crumpled. His entire identity was tied to his badge. Without it, he was just a bitter, angry old man. "Chief David, please. It was a mistake." "A mistake is writing the wrong address on a ticket bill," Peterson snarled. "What you did was a career-ending, department-destroying, lawsuit-generating act of pure, unadulterated stupidity and prejudice. Now get out of my office." Defeated, the 2 men placed their badges and guns on the desk. The metallic clink sounded like a death nail. They walked out of the office, no longer police officers, but liabilities. Chief Peterson then took a deep breath and walked to the holding area, personally carrying a key to Marcus's handcuffs. He found Marcus exactly where he'd left him, calm and composed. The chief unlocked the cuffs, wincing at the deep red welts on Marcus's wrists. "Agent Sutton, Marcus, on behalf of the Eagles Peak Police Department, I want to offer my most profound and sincere apologies." Marcus slowly rubbed his wrists, his expression unreadable. "Save it, Chief. Your apologies are for the cameras and the depositions. Right now I need to get back to my family." Of course, Peterson said quickly. "I'll drive you myself. We've already arranged for your resort fees to be waived. A full complimentary." Marcus cut him off with a look. Don't you dare try to buy your way out of this. You think a free meal is going to make my 8-year-old son forget the sight of his father being handcuffed? You think it's going to erase the terror in my daughter's eyes?" Peterson withered under the intensity of his gaze. "No, of course not." "Get my things," Marcus commanded, "and find out the name of the woman who made the 911 call. I want her full name and address." I can't release civilian information." "You unlawfully arrested a federal agent based on her malicious report. You will give me her name or Agent Romano's next call will be to the U.S. Attorney's Office to discuss obstruction of justice. Your choice." Peterson nodded numbly and skewered off to comply. The reunion at the resort was quiet and heavy. Anya flew into Marcus's arms the moment he walked through the door of their suite. She held him tightly, her composure finally breaking in a series of shuddering breaths. Leo clung to his leg, refusing to let go. Maya just stood back watching him, her young face etched with an old, painful wisdom. She looked at the red marks on his wrists, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. Marcus knelt and pulled both his children into a hug. "I'm okay," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Daddy's okay. We're all okay." But they weren't. A line had been crossed. The sanctuary of their family had been breached, and the illusion of safety that Marcus worked so hard to provide had been shattered. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Marcus and Anya sat on the balcony of their suite, the moonlit lake, a placid, mocking mirror of the turmoil in their hearts. "What are we going to do, Marcus?" Anya asked softly. Marcus stared out into the darkness. The calm, detached agent was gone. In his place was a husband and a father whose family had been wounded. "They picked the wrong man," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "They picked the wrong family. They wanted to show me what they thought my place in the world was. Now I'm going to use the full power of that world to show them theirs. This isn't over. It's just beginning." The local news had already gotten a tip. A reporter was sniffing around the police department asking about a mishandled arrest at the Lakeside Grand. The story was about to break, and the storm Marcus Sutton promised was about to make landfall. The arrival of the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility, OPR team, was less like an investigation and more like a surgical strike. They were led by a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Genevieve Reed, an investigator who had a reputation for being thorough, impartial, and utterly terrifying to anyone with something to hide. They didn't come to Eagles Peak to ask favors. They came to collect facts, and they had federal authority to back every request. Their first stop was Chief Peterson's office. They requisitioned everything: the 911 call recording, dispatch logs, personnel files for Callahan and Miller, and most importantly, the body camera footage. Callahan and Miller had been so confident, so wrapped up in their own authority, that they had forgotten the cardinal rule of modern policing. The camera is always watching, and their cameras had captured everything. The footage was damning. It showed the serene pool scene they had interrupted. It captured Callahan's immediate aggression and Miller's passive compliance. It recorded Ania's calm, logical attempts to explain their status as guests. It preserved for posterity Callahan's sneering dismissal of her and the ugly, loaded question, "What are you people doing here?" Most critically, it captured Marcus's controlled, professional demeanor throughout the encounter. There was no aggression, no disorderly conduct. There was only a father trying to protect his family while navigating a hostile, racially charged confrontation. The footage completely obliterated Callahan's official report, which was filled with lies about a combative subject who was escalating the situation. The interviews with Callahan and Miller were conducted separately in sterile interrogation rooms, usually reserved for criminals. Genevieve Reed led the questioning. Callahan, represented by a flustered local lawyer, tried to bluster his way through. He stuck to the story in his report, painting Marcus as the instigator. "He had a look about him," Callahan said, puffing out his chest. 2 years on the job, you learn to read people. He was trouble." Reed simply slid a tablet across the table and pressed play. She showed him the body cam footage of him sneering. Rapper, basketball player. Callahan's face turned ashen. That was just locker room talk. A way to build rapport. Rapport, Sergeant? Reed asked, her voice dangerously soft. It sounds like prejudice. And a moment later, when you arrested him, what part of his calm demeanor and open hand suggested he was a threat? She played another clip. This one of him roughly shoving Marcus into the squad car. Is that standard procedure for handling a nonviolent subject accused of trespassing? Callahan's defense crumbled. He was confronted with the irrefutable truth of his own actions, his own words. His lies were useless. He was exposed. Miller's interview was even more pathetic. He tried to portray himself as a reluctant participant, just a junior officer following the orders of a senior sergeant. I had my doubts, of course, Miller claimed, his eyes shifting nervously. But Sergeant Callahan, he's a very forceful personality. I was just trying to keep the peace. Reed leaned forward, her eyes pinning him to his chair. Officer Miller, the camera footage shows at least 5 distinct moments where you could have intervened. You could have suggested verifying with the front desk. You could have questioned the grounds for the arrest. You could have advised your partner to loosen the handcuffs. You did none of those things. Your silence was your consent. Your inaction was your participation. You stood by and watched a man's civil rights be violated. And you did nothing. In the eyes of the law, that makes you just as culpable. Miller deflated completely, slumping in his chair. A man utterly broken by his own moral failure. The investigation didn't stop with the police. The OPR team, along with local detectives now under immense pressure, paid a visit to Brenda Langford. She greeted them at the door of her sprawling home, expecting to be praised as a concerned citizen. That expectation died quickly. They played her the 911 call. "Ma'am," the detective said, "in your call, you described a loud, aggressive man and an unruly family. The resort's security cameras and the officer's body cameras show a family quietly enjoying their afternoon. Can you explain that discrepancy?" Brenda stammered, twisting the pearls around her neck. "Well, they seemed aggressive. Their tone, it felt threatening." "What exactly did they say that was threatening?" I don't remember the exact words, but it was the feeling I got. I felt unsafe." "Did you feel unsafe because of their actions?" Reed cut in, her voice sharp as a scalpel. "Or did you feel unsafe because a black family was occupying a space you felt they didn't belong in?" Brenda Langford flushed a deep, ugly red. "I am not a racist. I was just concerned." "Your concern, ma'am, led to the unlawful arrest of a federal agent and the traumatization of his 2 young children," Reed said coldly. "Making a false police report is a criminal offense. And given the circumstances, the U.S. Attorney's Office may be interested in exploring if this false report constitutes a racially motivated hate crime." The threat hung in the air. The color drained from Brenda's face. The smug crusader was gone, replaced by a terrified woman facing the real-world consequences of her prejudice. Meanwhile, the Sutton had hired a high-powered civil rights attorney out of Charlotte, a woman named Jessica Pierce, who had a reputation for taking down corrupt police departments. The news of the incident had exploded, first locally, then nationally. The story of the FBI agent arrested at a pool was irresistible, a perfect storm of race, power, and injustice. The Lakeside Grand Resort, desperate to avoid a PR nightmare, had already issued a public apology and fired the manager on duty for not intervening. The first wave of karma had crashed down on Eagles Peak. 2 police careers were over. A concerned citizen was facing potential criminal charges. A police department was in disgrace. But for Marcus Sutton, this was only the beginning of the reckoning. The initial shock had passed, and now a cold, methodical pursuit of justice had taken its place. He wasn't just fighting for his family anymore. He was fighting for every family who didn't have a badge and the full weight of the FBI to back them up. The 6 months that followed the arrest at the Lakeside Grand Resort were not a period of quiet healing, but of relentless, methodical dismantling. The shockwave from that sun-drenched afternoon radiated outwards, cracking the foundations of careers, reputations, and the corrupt systems that had enabled them. For the town of Eagles Peak, it was a painful but necessary reckoning. For the Sutton family, it was the arduous process of transforming trauma into a catalyst for profound and lasting change. Justice, Marcus knew, wasn't a single event, but a process, and its final stages were about to be devastatingly public. The trial of former Sergeant Bill Callahan became the epicenter of this transformation. National media descended on the small county courthouse, their satellite trucks lining the streets. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Callahan, now a civilian in an ill-fitting suit, seemed to have aged a decade. The swagger was gone, replaced by a pasty, desperate pallor. He sat beside his lawyer, a man who looked perpetually overwhelmed as the prosecution, led by a sharp assistant attorney general from the state capitol, laid out its case. The trial's centerpiece was the body camera footage played on a large screen for the jury to see. It was more compelling than any witness testimony. The jurors watched in stony silence as the idyllic pool scene was shattered by Callahan's aggressive approach. They heard his condescending tone, the undisguised venom in the phrase, "What are you people doing here?" They saw Marcus Sutton, calm and compliant, attempting to de-escalate with the practiced patience of a trained professional. They witnessed the gratuitous roughness of the arrest, the cold indifference to the crying children. The footage didn't just show a crime, it painted a visceral portrait of prejudice wearing a badge. When Callahan took the stand in his own defense, it was a disaster. He tried to project the same old-school authority, but it came across as bitter and dishonest. Under a withering cross-examination, his narrative of an aggressive, non-compliant subject completely unraveled. "Former Sergeant Callahan," the prosecutor began, her voice calm and lethal. "You stated in your report that Agent Sutton was acting in a threatening manner. Can you point to the moment in the video where he threatens you?" Callahan sputtered. "It wasn't just his words. It was his demeanor, his posture. He was challenging my authority." "So, a black man standing tall and speaking in a calm voice is, in your professional opinion, a threat?" The prosecutor pressed. "Is that the training you received, or is it a standard you apply selectively?" The courtroom was silent. Callahan's lies were laid bare, exposed by the simple, unblinking eye of his own camera. The prosecutor's closing argument was a searing indictment, not just of Callahan, but of the culture that created him. "This isn't about a mistake," she told the jury, her voice ringing with conviction. "This is about an abuse of power, an abuse of trust, and an abuse of the oath this man took to protect and serve all citizens, not just the ones he deems worthy." The jury's deliberation was a formality. They returned in just under 2 hours. As the foreman stood to read the verdict, Marcus Sutton, who had attended every day of the trial, watched Callahan's face. He saw a flicker of disbelief, the last gasp of a man who genuinely believed he was untouchable. "On the charge of unlawful restraint, we the jury find the defendant guilty. On the charge of perjury, we the jury find the defendant guilty. On the charge of official oppression, we the jury find the defendant guilty." A quiet gasp went through the courtroom. Callahan physically slumped in his chair as if his strings had been cut. At the sentencing hearing a week later, the judge looked down at him from the bench, his expression one of cold contempt. "Mr. Callahan, you were given a badge and a gun to be a guardian of your community. Instead, you acted as an occupying force, enforcing your own bigoted worldview. You did not just arrest an innocent man. You betrayed the very ideal of justice you swore to uphold." He sentenced Bill Callahan to 3 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for at least 18 months. The sight of the former sergeant, his face a mask of ruined pride, being led away in handcuffs, was the first true moment of catharsis. Rick Miller's fate was quieter, but no less complete in its own way. He had accepted a plea deal, his testimony against Callahan, the price of his freedom from a jail cell. On the stand, he was a pitiful figure, barely able to make eye contact with his former partner. He recounted the events of the day in a low, trembling voice, admitting that he knew from the beginning that something was deeply wrong, but had been too intimidated to speak up. His testimony sealed Callahan's fate, but it also cemented his own legacy as a coward. Stripped of his badge and barred for life from law enforcement, he became a pariah. He lost his friends on the force. His marriage crumbled under the stress, and he eventually took a low-wage, overnight stocking job at a big box store. His prison was not one of bars and concrete, but of shame and regret, forced every day to live with the consequences of his silence. The institutional rot was addressed with similar precision. A fiery town hall meeting saw hundreds of citizens pack into the high school auditorium to confront Chief David Peterson. He was shouted down as he tried to offer platitudes about a few bad apples. The town council, reading the furious mood of their constituents, held an emergency session and passed a unanimous vote of no confidence. Peterson was out, his legacy forever tarnished. The Department of Justice, with input from Marcus and his superiors, then imposed a sweeping federal consent decree on the Eagles Peak Police Department. It mandated a complete overhaul of their hiring practices, use of force policies, and most significantly, their implicit bias and de-escalation training. The new program was unofficially nicknamed the Sutton Reforms by the federal monitors sent to oversee the transition. For Brenda Langford, the reckoning came not in a criminal court, but in the cold, sterile environment of a legal deposition. The Sutton civil rights attorney, Jessica Pierce, was a master of her craft. In a windowless conference room, she systematically dismantled Brenda's carefully constructed image of a concerned citizen. She presented Brenda's history of frivolous 911 calls. She had sworn affidavit from other resort guests who described the Sutton as a perfectly normal, happy family. "Mrs. Langford," Pierce said, her tone deceptively pleasant, "you stated you felt unsafe, yet you were over 50 FT away, separated by a pool full of people. What specifically was the threat?" "It was their attitude," Brenda said weakly. "They were acting like they owned the place." "Is that unusual for guests at a luxury resort who have in fact paid to be there?" Pice countered. Under hours of questioning, Brenda's self-righteousness cracked, revealing the ugly prejudice beneath. She was forced to admit she had no factual basis for her call, only a feeling. The deposition was a humiliating ordeal, and faced with the certainty of an even more humiliating public trial. She and her husband agreed to a massive out-of-sea court settlement. Her social life, the very thing she thought she was protecting, evaporated. She was asked to resign from the board of her favorite charity. Old friends suddenly stopped returning her calls. At the country club, conversations would cease when she entered a room. She had become a pariah, isolated by the very community she had appointed herself to defend. Amidst this public fallout, the Sutton focused on their private healing. The journey was not easy. Leo started having nightmares and Maya grew withdrawn, her typically bright outlook clouded by a new cynicism. Anya, using her expertise as a pediatrician, recognized the signs of trauma and insisted they seek family therapy. In those sessions, they learned to talk about what had happened. Maya, in a voice trembling with a rage she hadn't known she possessed, spoke of the helplessness she felt watching her hero be brought low. Leo, using puppets, reenacted the scene, finally able to give voice to his confusion and fear. It was painful, but necessary work. Marcus and Anya decided to channel that pain into purpose. They agreed to one major televised interview, determined to control their own narrative. On screen, they were a portrait of strength and grace. Anya spoke eloquently about the generational impact of such trauma on children of color. When a child sees their parent, their protector, humiliated and rendered powerless because of the color of their skin, she explained. It sends a message that their own safety is conditional. That scar is something we as a society have a moral obligation to prevent. Marcus, for his part, refused to be cast as a simple victim. My profession gave me a recourse that most people don't have, he said, his voice firm and clear. But this was never about me being an FBI agent. It was about a system that allowed a man like Bill Callahan to wield unchecked power. This isn't a black and white issue. It's a right and wrong issue. Accountability is the only path forward. The interview had a profound impact. True to their word, they used the entire settlement from the Langfords to establish the Sutton Family Foundation for Police Accountability. Its mission was to provide funding for body cameras for underfunded departments and to offer legal support to families who had been victims of police misconduct but lacked the resources to fight back. A year after the arrest, the Sutton family stood on a black sand beach in Hawaii. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Maya, now 15, was showing a laughing Leo how to skip stones across the impossibly blue water. The scar of Eagle's Peak was still there, a part of their story they would carry forever. But it was no longer an open wound. It had been transformed into a source of strength, a reminder of their resilience. Anya leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder as they watched their children. "Do you think they'll be okay?" she whispered. Marcus wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "They're Suts," he said, a quiet pride in his voice. "They're stronger than they know. We all are." He looked out at the vast, cleansing expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The karma that had swept through Eagle's Peak wasn't some mystical force. It was the direct, inevitable result of actions and consequences, of lies being met with truth, and of one family's refusal to let injustice be the final word in their story. It was the hard-won justice they had built themselves for their family and for countless others to come. And in that, there was a profound and lasting peace. The story of the Sutton family is a stark reminder that injustice can find you anywhere, even in a place that's supposed to be a paradise. But it's also a powerful testament to what happens when you fight back, when you demand accountability, and when the truth, armed with evidence, is brought into the light. The karma that hit Sergeant Callahan, Officer Miller, and Brenda Langford wasn't a matter of luck. It was a direct consequence of their actions, brought about by a family that refused to be victims.